we have our traffic consultants from AECOM, and we have representatives from Stanford University here. The fundamental purpose of this meeting, though, is to hear from you. And this session is designed to be a public input session on the draft EIR. To help facilitate your comments, I'm going to go very briefly over the project, the draft EIR that's out there, and the process that we're using to absorb the comments from the community. And then we're going to open the mic up for your verbal comments. We have a court reporter here that's going to capture your comments verbatim, and your comments will be reflected in the final EIR and responded to in the final EIR. And you can do all your comments here verbally. You can do a combination of verbal comments and then written comments that'll describe how we're going to accept your written comments. But either way, this is a formal input session to the draft EIR. First, a bit about the permit. The permit application covers the lands that Stanford own in the unincorporated area of Santa Clara County. The academic growth area, where the bulk of development occurs at Stanford, is within the unincorporated area. The application that they've submitted is asking permission to build the next phase and increment of academic space and the next phase and increment of housing, plus some childcare. The anticipated project is going to take about through 2035 or 17 years to build out. And the proposed development will occur in sub-districts on the campus as shown here. And I actually have some paper copies of this presentation. So if anybody wants a paper copy, just let me know, because we've got probably enough for everybody here. Because you can't see the distribution, but be it known that that amount, that degree of development and housing is distributed within districts on the campus. There is no development proposed in the foothills area or in the faculty housing San Juan district. Now, this is a general use permit. I talked about the next increment of development. It's a part of the entire regulatory framework for Stanford, which includes the community plan, an element of the Santa Clara general plan, and a previous use permit. This is the second in a series of use permits that have been applied for under the general use permit. An EIR was conducted and prepared. It makes interesting reading for the first community plan and the first general use permit issued under the community plan. And then midway through the development and build out of the 2000 general use permit, Stanford prepared a sustainability study that evaluated what the build out of the campus would be through a planning horizon through 2035, and answer the question, depending upon the growth rate you choose, is there enough room within the academic growth boundary without having to expand development outside the academic growth boundary or the urban limit line for the campus? So to put this application in perspective, I've got a graph that shows the pre-2000 amount of academic space on the campus, the amount that was applied for and approved in the 2000 general use permit, and then the amount that is being applied for as part of the 2018 general use permit. And the same data for the number of housing units. There are policies in the community plan that govern our decision makers' review of individual use permits. And these are some of the more significant policies. One is that development on the campus should be compact and, to the extent possible, be confined to within the urban limit line or the academic growth boundary of the campus. And this application is proposing no change in the academic growth boundary. There's a goal and a standard as a part of the 2000 general use permit to grow without creating traffic. And traffic is defined as the trips going and coming to the campus in the peak morning and peak afternoon hours. And this proposal continues that standard. And and is set as a goal for this next increment of development to achieve the no new net trip standard. I will, thank you. I'll just talk right into the mic. Thank you for saying so, though. The 2000 general use permit has a linkage between the amount of growth that can occur on the campus and the number of housing units that are created. And the proposal is to continue the linkage at the same ratio as the 2000 general use permit. And that's 605 units or beds per 500,000 square feet of development. And then Stanford's proposing to continue to provide funds for low-income housing at the rate of $20 a square foot. So now the draft environmental impact report. The basic framework for the draft environmental impact report is what's the effect of this project on the environment? What mitigations might be imposed on the project to reduce that effect? And then finally, what are the alternatives that might be considered that would have the effect of reducing environmental impacts? And that's the basic framework. You know this, if you've seen the document, we've got two volumes that divide up the chapters of the EIR plus an appendices. Very, very long. There's more than 2,000 pages in the appendices, for example. And it's weighty reading, so if you haven't started to wade into the document, we urge that you do now, because it is a lot of material, really comprehensive treatment of a lot of different topics. Chapter 5 is the portion of the draft EIR that goes through the sequence of analysis for the various environmental parameters. What's the baseline? What is the impact above the baseline from this project? How does that impact relate to significance criteria? In other words, is the impact significant under the CEQA framework? And then what mitigations might be applied to mitigate that particular impact? And after you apply those mitigations, is the impact still significant? In Chapter 5, that analysis is done and completed on all these topics. Now, I'm going to just quickly flash through some of the key issues of concern to maybe be a catalyst for your own thoughts and affirm that you probably have some of these concerns yourselves. One is, how will this project affect housing supply and demand on the peninsula? The other is transportation, which is no surprise. These are some of the other topics. Really, how many new people might be brought into our community, and where might they be living, where might they be working? What sort of demands does that place on our community services and schools? So the population and housing standards are very thoroughly reviewed in this document, or not standards, but facts, and the increase in population and housing demands as a direct result of this project. And so on. Some of these you're all familiar with because they are the key concerns about any development, but they are addressed in great detail in this document. But I'll say the purpose of everybody's involvement is to look at these issues. Hopefully you have insight that could help us analyze the impacts, analyze the possible mitigations, take a position on their significance, and report ultimately to the decision makers of what the impacts of this project would be in this area. I wanted to go briefly through transportation to describe a little bit about the framework that we've analyzed all the various topics under, but with emphasis on transportation because that's such a chief concern. The draft EIR concludes that if Stanford does not accomplish the no new net trips standard, then there will be significant impacts on intersections and freeways in the area. The mitigation that's outlined in the draft EIR is the no new net trips program. And it occurs at 3 levels. 1, Stanford reduce the trips that go to and from the campus in the peak hours of the day, the morning and the evening. through programs that they fund and manage. The next tier is that they would reduce trips in the area that's affected by the university, by traffic. And it's a very large area, as you can imagine. So they can reduce trips to and from the campus, or they can reduce trips in the impact area. That's tier 2. Tier 3 is they actually pay into a fund so that the county could work with local jurisdictions to also reduce trips in the impact area, and that would be done by making it easier for people to get out of their cars and either be pedestrians or bicyclists or get in transit. And then as a measure of last resort, if the impacts aren't fully addressed through these traffic demand management programs, then they would be paying to the county to apply funds to projects that would improve intersections' ability to handle traffic or road segments' abilities to handle traffic. So there's sort of 4 mitigations that would be applied to the project with a premium on traffic demand management, and almost as a last resort, increasing the capacity of intersections or road segments to handle traffic. After that mitigation is applied, though, there is a potential that there could be impacts to intersections and road segments. So even after that mitigation is applied, we have determined that this project could have a significant effect on the environment and would require an overriding consideration to approve. I'll talk a little bit more about that when I review all the results. So this, I guess you can see this. This is the conclusion of our analysis for all the topic areas. And effectively, there's 3 impacts that remain significant after mitigations that are applied. The first is noise and vibration, and that's due to construction on the campus, in that there's a potential that there'd be a sensitive receptor right adjacent to construction, and they'd be exposed to noise levels above significance criteria. The other is transportation and traffic, that if the traffic demand management program isn't successful and the intersections aren't approved in a timely manner coincident with the impact, there could be significant effects on intersections and traffic on local freeways. And then finally, historic resources. There's a lot of measures that would discourage modification or demolition of any resource that's considered historic, but there is a potential that there may not be any choice. Stanford would have to go through a distinct process to establish that and do a supplemental environmental review, but there is a slight potential that a historic resource could be harmed by the project. And so that's the third area that might still have a significant effect after mitigations. So there were several alternatives evaluated. One that's required is, what if this project doesn't occur at all and Stanford stops growing? What's the environmental effect of that? The next variation on that alternative is that every individual development proposal at Stanford requires an individual permit and an individual environmental analysis. So it's not being done on a programmatic basis, not being done on a long-term analysis basis, being done on a project-by-project basis. Another alternative is the reduced project alternative, roughly half the development approved over the same time period. And then finally, an alternative that says under no circumstances would a resource that's deemed historic be modified or demolished. And in terms of ranking, the no project alternative is the environmentally superior alternative, followed by the reduced project alternative. And that's all described in the alternative section of the draft EIR. So now process. We are in the 60-day draft EIR process. The comments that we receive will be analyzed by us as a lead agency. We'll determine if it requires any changes to the environmental impact report, and we will also respond to every comment that we received. And we'll be publishing a final EIR with the results of our analysis and all of our comments and everybody's comments. And that'll happen sometime in the spring. The staff analysis of the adequacy of the EIR will accompany our analysis of the consistency of this project with our policies and our ordinances. And the combination of the two will go to our Planning Commission, which renders a recommendation to our Board of Supervisors. And the board is the ultimate decision maker on the adequacy of the environmental impact report and whether or not this project is or isn't consistent with our rules. So we have this as an input meeting, and there's a second one. In November 30th, our Planning Commission is holding a special meeting in Palo Alto, and it's similar to this. Explanation of the project, the process, and then an invitation for people to comment. You can get the draft environmental impact report off our website, which is the best place to get it, but if you like paper copy, we have it in local libraries. And there's some background documents that help put this draft EIR in perspective. I mentioned the community plan, the last use permit, and the last environmental impact report, and the sustainability study. But I also call out that on an annual basis, since the 2000 general use permit was approved, our staff prepares a report card that documents the compliance of the previous year's development with the general use permit and the EIR mitigations. And those reports are reviewed by our Planning Commission on an annual basis and then posted on our website. They're all available. And so too is the compliance report that we prepare that documents the no new net trips, the compliance with the no new net trips standard. And those reports are also available. David Rader is our staff person here, is the project manager for the EIR, and he's the person's email inbox that we're inviting comments to. Right now, the close of the public comment period is December 4th. So that concludes the presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have, but if there aren't questions, then I'll ask you to come up and speak to the microphone, and ideally state your name. Try to speak slowly so that our court reporter can capture all your comments. And yes, you have a question? Okay, may I invite you up here to say so, because we want to get them in the record. So state your name and then just have at it.
Okay, my name is Janet Davis, and I live on Alpine Road. And as far as I'm concerned, the whole part of the EIR referring to traffic is absolute nonsense. You say no new net trips, but if you look at the fine print, it's totally meaningless. I live on Alpine Road. I've lived there for 50 years, and I can tell you that traffic is an absolute nightmare on Alameda, on Santa Cruz, on Alpine, and on Sand Hill. When I read the draft EIR, it said that you're supposed to consult with and consider the nearby jurisdictions. Everything I've read is all about Palo Alto and Santa Clara County. There's not a darn thing that I've found yet about Alpine Road. Sometimes it takes 6 iterations to get through that traffic light at Alpine. Same at Sand Hill. When in the mornings, traffic is backed up on the freeway all along the 280 coming both north and south. It's backed up the entire length of Alpine. It's backed up all along Unipro Serra to Campus Drive West. I can't get out of my driveway until about 10:30. I can't make a left turn. Yesterday I had a doctor's appointment in Portola Valley, and I had to make a right turn and make a huge loop and go back along Alpine Road. I followed the cars. They go to Stanford down Campus Drive West, Campus Drive East. The EIR doesn't take into account anything but the core campus on 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the evening. However, that leaves a whole bunch of hours There's traffic at 5 a.m. It doesn't take any notice of construction trucks. The last time Stanford did any construction, we clocked trucks, double semis, whizzing down Alpine Road at the rate of one every 17 seconds. And I followed those trucks, and I got license numbers, and I know where they went. They went to Stanford. They've been going to the golf course, and they've been going to the hospital. Stanford did help by saying that the construction trucks should not use Alpine. But some of them did, and a lot of them are still doing that. Trucks even go down Alpine and then make a turn onto Sand Hill Road to facilities owned by Stanford. And I went through the no new trips, and it's full of baloney. Like if somebody from East Palo Alto gets on the shuttle and gets off at an office in Palo Alto, that is a deduction that counts. So one more car can go down Alpine or Sand Hill. And there's similar things like that all throughout the draft EIR. And I have a lot of things to say, but I'm not organized. I want to write it down. But I believe the whole traffic impact study is baloney.
Okay, thanks for modeling the perfect type of comment that we're looking for. So, does anybody else want to just, do you want to come up and provide your comments?
Hi, my name is Hank Lawrence. I live in the Sharon Oaks Association. The back of my yard is on Sand Hill Road. I moved there in 1989. Between 1989 and 2003, believe it or not, that two-lane road and that two-lane bridge really worked well. Even when I was coming home up Sand Hill Road and I was taking a long time to get home, I realized that having that modulation there made for far less noise. The traffic on Sand Hill Road, in my estimation, has increased at least 50% since 2003. Since 1989 and 2003, there was a small amount of growth, but nothing that was significant. But since 2003, when the city of Menlo Park entered into an agreement with Stanford to redo the intersection at Santa Cruz and Sand Hill Road, traffic has gone up significantly. More importantly, the ambulances are just coming by all the time. I have a thing, because my wife went to Stanford, and they're talking about the new hospital and the new emergency room that's going to be 3 times the size, so I can figure that the ambulances are going to be 3 times as much going down there, and the noise is incredible. I measure about 75 dB during rush hour. A friend of mine who was the president of the HOA had a meter out there. We're hitting about 75 dBA during rush hour. And when the ambulances are coming by, they're between 87 and 93 dB, which is, it's like jet engines almost. I feel that there are 2 things that Stanford should be doing immediately. One is they need to put at least $10 million into noise abatement on Sand Hill Road that affects all residences along that corridor. And that includes Palo Alto portion of Sand Hill Road and the Menlo Park portion. The second thing, which I needed to do, and I went before the council in 2003, and I said if Stanford is planning any significant development, they need to build their own road between Page Mill and Alpine Road that goes off the freeway with nice exits that you can get into Stanford, that will hook up to Campus Drive West and to Quarry Road eventually. And they need to redo that, and they need to make it like a 4-lane divided road to get that done. This no new net trips, when they're talking about deductions for other people, that's kind of, fooling around with the numbers. I don't think that's appropriate. But more importantly, there's been a migration from the south of the campus to the north of the campus, huge migration. And basically, it's all centered around the hospital. You got the Lucille Salt Packard Hospital there now. You're getting the new hospital there. You're getting the new emergency room there. I can remember going up Sand Hill Road when it's 2 lanes. There were fields there with herons and egrets. They're not there anymore. They're long gone. They have housing there now where the herons and egrets used to be, walking in the fields. I'm not saying that Stanford doesn't have a right to develop, but if they do so and they cause harm to the neighboring communities, they need to address the harm they're causing to the communities and make good, because the people in Menlo Park feel like we feel like we're being taken advantage of, that Stanford is using a heavy hand, and they have this attitude like, if we can get away with it, we will. And they've been less than forthcoming on notification with Menlo Park. They just have a long history of that, going back to the time when, our condo development was in that noise zone. And what they did is they agreed if there's so many dB above, then we're going to do something about the noise where you live. What they did is they put in soundproof asphalt. And when they took that, and for about 2 or 3 years after they put in that soundproof asphalt, it really worked. And then they took the measurements after they put down the new asphalt, the before and after measurements, and they were up a little bit, but not enough to trigger, remediation. But the asphalt, they take the measurements, and about 3 years later, the asphalt, guess what? It's deteriorating. That's what happens to asphalt. And the noise is just really unbearable. And my HOA went to Stanford, and we asked them in good faith, okay, we realize that all the noise is caused by Stanford. We'd like you to help us build a wall. And by the way, we only wanted them to kick in 50%. And Steve Elliott just looked at us like, how dare you even suggest anything like that? That's totally out of the question. We're not going to do it. He called it a money grab when we're suffering. And we're suffering as a direct result of Stanford. And we're not saying Stanford's 100% responsible, because some of it comes from natural growth in the area. And that's why we went to Stanford and said, we only want you to pay for half the wall. We'll foot the other half. And they just rejected that out of hand. When they went to do the 2131 Sand Hill Road, they neglected to talk about the Quarry Road project that they want to build a new hospital on, or an office building with about 600 parking spaces, a lot of parking. And I thought that was disrespectful to the council. That was an omission of a material fact. And when I was working with the Bureau of Political Military Affairs for things unrelated to Stanford, that was to be considered a lie by them and subject to fines up to $10 million, depending on how egregious the lie was. So, I interpreted omission of a material fact as being a lie, okay? And you can interpret it otherwise, that's up to you. They said they did notification to the community when they were doing 2131 Sand Hill Road. They did notification to Stanford Hills. I don't know how many of you realize this, but the land where Stanford Hills is owned by the university. The houses are owned by the people. And in about 2012, or maybe it was a little bit earlier, they extended these leases because they were expiring in 2019. They extended it to 2059 with the proviso that Stanford has the right of first refusal. Well, everyone knows how much money Stanford has. Last year it was like up to $36 billion. I imagine it's probably closer to $40 billion now. But when someone's selling their house and they know that Stanford has the right of first refusal, that's going to diminish demand. People aren't going to come looking at the house because they know that no way they can outbid Stanford. That's just not going to happen. So what happens is that the prices are depressed. Stanford gets a fairly good deal. then they move professors in. And that's all right. They own, they own the house now. But when they do that, that's being used for a university purpose, the neighboring community, which is like Los Lomitas School District, Menlo Park Fire Department, all these community services are the brunt of that is being put on the people who live in Menlo Park. They're more or less paying for Stanford, who has so much money, but yet they're forcing the communities to pay for the infrastructure needs of the university when they do that. So I feel that Stanford has taken advantage of Menlo Park for going on at least 20 years. And I really feel that it would be a good idea to do two things, traffic mitigation, at least $10 million for that corridor. And then also, they're going to have to do it sooner or later. They might as well do it now. They should build that road between Page Mill and Alpine Road, 4-lane divided road. Oh, by the way, it should be grade separated from Junipero Serra, because that road should be used for Stanford, for people going to Stanford. If you make it where they can get onto Junipero Serra, then they'll peel off to either Palo Alto or Menlo Park. So either the road should go over it or under Junipero Serra, but there should not be any access from that road to get to Junipero Serra. Hook in the Campus Drive west and then go into Quarry Road, because that's where the major development is happening, and that's, to me, the best way to address it. Thank you. My name is Hank Lawrence. I live at 2441 Sharon Oaks Drive, Menlo Park, and I'm not on Steve Elliott's Christmas list.
By all means. Yes. So for 2 or 3 times a year, someone observes traffic coming and going to the university 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the evening. And they count the cars that go by. They record the license plate, because a car that is just passing through the university doesn't count against the cars that have as a final destination the university. And then there's some hospital traffic discounts that occur. The concept is the development is proposed within the academic growth boundary. So every entrance and exit to that academic growth boundary is monitored during those 2 time frames. The standard is that the peak hour of those 2 hours is compared in the traffic coming and going. It's the measure changes between the morning and the evening, because it's the direction of travel that's the most important. So it's the morning direction of travel and the evening direction of travel. Trips are counted in the peak hour during those 2 hour periods, and that's compared to the peak hour that was measured in 2001. And they have complied with the standard if that hasn't increased. And there's some peculiarities that they're allowed to exceed the standard for a couple of years and don't have to take measures if over a 3-year period they're within a certain percentage of the standard. But effectively, between applying trip credits and the cordon counts is what it's referred to, they've met that standard from the beginning since 2001. Does that help?
Yes, I'm just wondering where are they located for their checking 2 hours?
I think there's 16 entrances and exits, if I have that number accurate. Yeah, there's 16 different points of measurement. And it pretty much brackets the entire academic growth boundary, which is sort of the project area, if you will. It doesn't cover, I'll say, trips outside of the project area. And no, it doesn't. Because the concept is the the defined project is what's happening within the academic growth boundary. It doesn't capture the increase in traffic from other sources around the campus. It just doesn't. The proposal is this is the amount of growth that's happening in this area, and is it increasing trips to and from the project? That's the logic behind it. If the traffic that is coming from outside the area to the campus is absolutely counted at the point that they enter the campus. But if it's just oblique travel, just passing by.
2131 Sandhill, which is owned by Stanford, it wouldn't be included in this count, correct?
So I'm not familiar with it.
From 280 or Santa Cruz Avenue or Alpine, and they were going to 2131 Sandhill Road, which is a Stanford-owned property.
Then no, it would not, because that project is not a part of the application. Yeah.
And could you specify and give us a definition of the trip credits? There's been some discussion
Yes.
about what the trip credits are.
Yeah.
What qualifies?
Under the current program, if Stanford can document a reduction in trips from an investment that they've made in the entire impact area, then that constitutes a trip credit that can offset the people that are coming and going to the campus.
Is that the only way to get credit?
Yes.
Okay. What about Marguerite or?
Well, that could, if Marguerite, let's say a Marguerite program that doesn't necessarily affect the traffic coming and going to the campus, but affects the traffic in the impact area, that could count as a trip credit program.
Where would we find that information?
That is summarized in great detail in the 16 annual reports, exactly what trip credits have been applied for, what the rationale was for them. I'll say that there's been very little need to apply trip credits, that Stanford has been able to maintain the performance standard of the no net trips through the programs that they've implemented to and from the traffic corridor. But I'll say this is an area that we're inviting a lot of attention because, and want as many comments as we possibly can, because the typical critique is this, and we heard it earlier with Janet's comments. Yeah, is so should a trip credit that might affect traffic on Page Mill offset an impact on Alpine, for example? Should the trip credits be assigned to certain districts so that to offset an impact in that particular district, you have to have a trip credit and increase mobility or of transit or pedestrians in that particular district? And that's an area that we're looking at now, which would be an enhancement of the current way that you apply credits in the 2000 general use permit.
You said the 16 annual report in 2016.
No, there's that is one of them.
So all the way back, we have to go through all of that.
No. Read the 2016 one if you just want to get the full picture of how this program works. You don't have to read them all.
Because one of the things that the community was asked about in West Menlo Park is electric vehicles. We're seeing a very, very large increase of electric vehicles. And what we heard that have not been able to verify is that that also is a trip credit.
No.
Hybrids.
No. Single occupancy vehicles count as a trip. One trip. Yeah. It's just the car coming and going. Yeah. Let me just make sure that are you done with your questions? Okay, sure.
My other concern is the pollution. There are points that I can't have my house closed up because the pollution is so bad and it's my automobiles. I know in 30 years it's probably not going to be that way, but right now it's
Yeah.
really bad. Can't let my pets outside, even up in the early morning.
So let me say something just for clarification, that if you want to make a comment, come up and do it to the mic, I think, just to make sure we capture it. But if you have a question, go ahead and say it from your seat.
What are you doing to decrease pollution
The-
on the corridor? It's not just the trips and the noise and the vibration. It's also the pollution.
Yeah.
That also needs to be addressed.
I would say read the EIR, because all the emissions from the project are analyzed, including mobile emissions from cars, and then the amount of emissions that are generated and what the mitigations are, and how those emissions compare to significance criteria are all analyzed in the draft EIR.
The car emissions aren't the problem. It's the diesel emissions from the large trucks
The construction.
that are roaring up and down Sand Hill Road.
Okay. Okay.
I guess in your annual reports on the traffic, trying to meet no new trips, and they realize you count 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon.
Yes.
Are those 2-hour counts available in those reports?
Yes.
Those are just the selected 1 hour?
Yeah, they are. There's plenty of tables.
Entire 8-hour day?
We don't count for the 8-hour day, but those are comments that we've received. The framework.
Comment on that, so okay.
Yeah, no, but I'll just say this because I think it's important. The framework for analysis under CEQA is typically, and this has been particularly, I'll say, has been historically, looking at the traffic system as having capacity limitations. So you test it at its peak hours, and the assumption is that when you're off peak, you're not testing its ultimate capacity, so there's no impacts there. But we've heard plenty from the community saying that, well, it may not be a capacity issue to us, but more traffic is more traffic and nonetheless has an impact. So that's a fair comment, absolutely. Yeah. Janet.
Draft EIR accepted there would be 2,000 more parking facilities available. That belies the assertion that there's no need to have trips if you want 2,000 more parking.
Yes, there is a proposal that would allow Stanford to apply for an additional 2,000 parking spaces. There's a caveat that the parking spaces wouldn't significantly increase the traffic demands to and from the university. And you ask, how would that occur? And one thing that I've heard, and perhaps this is something that Stanford might want to respond to, is some of the parking, for example, could be storage for graduate student vehicles and not be used on a daily commute basis, but be available as storage if they have a spare car. But that analysis would have to be conducted separately to make sure that the approval of those 2,000 spaces doesn't upset the analysis that was conducted for the traffic impacts from the project. But that's a good point. That's the kind of thing I'll consider that a comment from you, Janet. How has the potential for them to apply for additional parking been considered in the draft EIR? All vehicles, yes. Yes.
I guess the other big actor is the hospital and that area, both hospitals. Did they go through the same process of getting a general use permit?
The hospital is not in the Santa Clara County jurisdiction, and I'm going to take a guess here that I know that they went through evaluation of the environmental effects under CEQA. My guess is it was an individual project application, and they're not working on a programmatic level, and that's within the city of Palo Alto, so they would have been the lead agency for that project, yes. But I will say, that there is a very thorough discussion of the addition of this project's impacts, for example, traffic, on the existing baseline. But there's also the cumulative analysis. So any projects that are considered reasonably foreseeable, and any project that's currently in a permitting pipeline is reasonably foreseeable, the addition of this projects to the baseline plus those reasonable foreseeable projects are all described in the cumulative impact analysis portion of the EIR. Yes, Christina.
This is actually being taped and broadcast, so when people are asking questions.
Oh, it's not.
So maybe you can
Repeat. Thank you very much. No, I'll do that. Yes. Okay. So the last question really was, how was the hospital recent expansion permit, and did it go through an environmental review? And the answer is yes, that it did, through the city of Palo Alto in their discretionary approval process. And the traffic associated with that type of project and similar projects that are reasonably foreseeable was considered in the analysis of traffic impacts of this project in the cumulative impacts section. And we have a microphone to pass around. Thank you very much. That'll help. So any more questions, or would people like to come up? Yes, we have another question.
Hi, I have a question about the Santa Margarita and how that mitigation of having to keep your trips down. I believe in the last EIR, the last use permit that was put out, is that the Santa Margarita was going to do some trips between here and a place in East Menlo Park, where the school had either research facilities or something, and then that would be going back and forth. And whether or not that's a requirement in this, I haven't had a chance to read the whole EIR yet, but whether or not that is going to continue or additional mitigation is going to be happening for that kind of reduced trips, because the Santa Margarita was taken away from the East Menlo Park recently, and it seems to me that if that is an obligation and that's no longer being fulfilled, who's to say that whatever you say you're going to do to mitigate the traffic, it's not going to be taken away from this area again?
I'll provide a general answer to the question, but if it's the fate of a particular bus line, I think that that's most better answered by Stanford. But I'll say that the way that the mitigation was structured in the 2000 general use permit, there weren't mandated traffic demand management measures like thou shalt run a Marguerite bus line from point A to point B throughout the life of the general use permit. It was a performance standard. You, Stanford, have the flexibility to deploy a number of traffic demand management programs, including bus lines, but the test of its success is going to be these cordon counts that occur every year. And if you fail, then theoretically you'd have the option, again, this rolling compliance period, of providing more bus lines or whatever other traffic demand management. So there's sort of flexibility for how Stanford meets these traffic demand management, no new net trip goals, but accountability in the sense that the effectiveness are measured on this annual basis. But that's probably enough of an answer from a CEQA perspective. Any more questions?
My name is Ron Snow, and I live on Stanford Avenue in Menlo Park. The one observation I have is that this net zero added trips concept seems to only, it's misleading to the rest of the communities, I believe. It's misleading to me. Because when I hear that, I think, well, that's a great term. That's a great plan. But it seems, as you're identifying, it only affects just a subset of what is happening within the Stanford area. And so I understand that even other Stanford activities and properties and interests are excluded from that. But I live next to Sand Hill Road as well. And as Janet's pointed out and others have pointed out, there's been a huge increase in traffic to the point that we've reached the saturation point where traffic is backed up from Stanford all the way to 280. That's true on Alpine, that's true on Sand Hill Road. And depending on the direction you're going, it's true on Santa Cruz Avenue and even Alameda going to the north there. So it's from that perspective and the impact on the communities, and since the north side of campus is almost all Menlo Park impacted, even though it's Palo Alto based, there seems to be that Stanford ought to agree that some formal aspect of Menlo Park and San Mateo County needs to be incorporated as a requirement, so that when you're saying net zero, that actually, or we need another term for these arteries that are bringing in the traffic to Stanford, and you need to be measuring that. So we're at a saturation point, as Hank, I think, pointed out. We've gotten several 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 more cars a day coming in on this to the campus, primarily to the campus. And I don't mean the academic campus, I mean all of Stanford. And so now we also have impacted all the new building that's going to be happening on El Camino. So we need some metric that's meaningful, that acknowledges and mitigates the traffic that are coming in on these roads. So I'm sort of echoing what Janet said. The other thing too is with you building 3,000 plus homes or housing and all of this square footage, all those construction trucks that are happening and all the construction vehicles that are happening in support of that construction, and then afterwards all the service vehicles and all the maintenance vehicles and all of the non-resident vehicles that go to support that infrastructure, are those counted in your metrics as well?
Yes, construction traffic is evaluated and is included in the commute traffic to and from the campus. I'll describe the CEQA framework that would tie together, for example, all the projects that Stanford might be contemplating as an owner. Because the CEQA framework is, you have a project area, and the analysis has to do with the extent of that project and its impacts. Now, the connection to other projects in the vicinity is made through that cumulative impact analysis I was saying. If there's a reasonably foreseeable project, then you have to consider it. It may be a Stanford-owned facility. It could be owned by another company, but it still has to be considered when you're doing the analysis of one fragment that you've mentioned. And the other fragments are also considered as a part of the baseline. If they've been recently developed and are ongoing, then their traffic is a part of the baseline that you evaluate in relation to the new addition or impact above the baseline. So it is counted, but it is a burden of CEQA that you consider an individual project in light of the other projects in the vicinity to get the totality of the impacts. I think what you're hoping for is something beyond that, which might mean let's consider Stanford and all of its multiple projects and draw an analysis of the traffic to and from all Stanford projects in the vicinity at one time, and have Stanford propose overarching management of all those projects. And that is not what the program is under CEQA.
Yeah, I think what there's sort of a responsibility that Stanford has as a community to be a good neighbor. And so if Stanford's ignoring what's known to be an issue like that and not incorporating exactly what you just said in their thinking, because of some caveat of one law or caveat of another law, I think that's sort of a problem. In one specific example, because 2131 Stanford was brought up, in that traffic analysis, they said that from the San Jose area going north on 280, that 33% of the traffic going to 2131 would go down, would be coming from the San Jose area. So I might have that off, 33%, 34%. But they didn't show one single car coming down Alpine Road, which was the shortest way to get to 2131. They showed all of that traffic, 100% of that traffic from the south going down Sand Hill Road. Mm-hmm. And so one of the problems is that how there's not a lot of confidence in a traffic study that excludes the obvious that traffic would be, a lot of that traffic would be coming down Alpine Road. So when there's discrepancies in the traffic study, I mean, what's the procedure for really identifying something that's so failed in the analysis?
Yeah. Well, I'll say in this case, the distribution model, where are people coming from, where are they going, what roads are they using, are all described in this environmental impact report. The traffic model has been peer-reviewed by a third-party consultant, and then we subject that to your judgment. I mean, part of what we actually want people to see is read those sections. If it doesn't make sense, if you think more people are using a corridor, you have some local knowledge that may show that the modeling assumptions are incorrect, make the comment, because we'll respond to it and investigate those particular instances. That'd be a great comment on this. If you see that we Well, the beauty of the final EIR process is that every comment is indexed, and the person that provided that comment and everybody else, that comment is indexed, and the answer to that comment is recorded for all to see. And if you have a disagreement with how the comment was responded to and whether or not you feel it's accurate, then you raise that with the decision makers and you say, we think that your EIR is flawed for these reasons, and that's part of the process. Yes.
Yeah, I have a technical question. This is a test for you.
Okay, then I'll probably pass this to the consultants then.
Well, it sounded like somebody was talking about the Bohannon Marguerite, which goes through my neighborhood, and I'm really sad that it's been rerouted because it was the only public transit coming through my neighborhood. And I blame Menlo Park and the interjurisdictional fighting on the streets that it had to go through. It had no choice because people getting the kids to school and stuff just completely destroyed its ability to get through Bay Road and Ringwood. But my question really is, a lot of the shuttles in San Mateo County that I'm much more familiar with, and I know this also includes some of the Dumbarton buses and some of the AC Transit buses that come across the bay, really rely on the RM2 funding from one of the tax measures from 10 years ago. And we've been having a lot of presentations on these premises that have also involved Facebook, who really sees itself serving Redwood City Caltrain and University Avenue Caltrain, but not Menlo Park. At least your Marguerites serve Menlo Park and University and California Avenue, all right? But then we also have the JPB, which is Caltrain or perhaps Dumbarton Corridor, which appears to want to jump in and restart railroad service, which will destroy the subsidies for our buses. And I'm just wondering, does that also have an impact on the Stanford buses? Is that too technical?
It's not too technical, but it's beyond my knowledge.
Okay.
Yeah, I really don't know. But I'll say that that's an important field for comments that we want to receive as the lead agency, because if you feel that there's some transit that may not be relied upon that could increase traffic to Stanford, that's important to know in terms of the feasibility of the traffic demand management system. A question was raised is, look, Caltrain's pretty full in peak hours right now, so could we anticipate that increased ridership on Caltrain might be a part of this accomplishment of the no net new trips? And Stanford did a separate study and analysis of the capacity of Caltrain going forward. It actually makes for very interesting reading. I learned a lot only because the increased capacity that will come with the electrification project is considerable. So there's an analysis of the Caltrain capacity at least to accommodate additional trips through the project planning period. But other transit services are also part of the analysis and are evaluated. So read up on that because it is considered in the EIR. And if you have some inside information, we'd like to hear about it. Yes, Hank?
I'm not opposed to Stanford adding parking, provided that the parking would be in underground structures right near 280 where they should be building that
Park
road.
and ride.
And they could have as far as I'm concerned, a 24-hour electric shuttle that goes in that road, which, by the way, does not intersect with Junipero Serra, either goes above it or below it and going into the campus. To me, it's where you put the parking. If you put the parking at the periphery, by 280, then you could have a lot of parking there, and it could be just you could just model it like those airport parking lots.
That's right. That could be traffic demand management.
Yeah. And no one parks at SFO unless they're going in there for like about 30 minutes to say goodbye to somebody. No one parks at that little parking lot at the airport. They're off these satellite lots, and I think that if you're going to be looking at a long-term growth plan for Stanford, have two large lots, preferably underground, by 280, by the road that needs to have their own exit between Page Mill and Alpine Road. Have them park there, get these electric buses, have them come there like every 5 minutes if you wanted to pick these people up and carry them, to where they're going on campus.
Okay, thank you. Any more comments or questions? Raise your hand and we'll bring you the mic. Yes. Yeah, you can do it there. Now that we've got a mic.
All right, my name's Whitney Berry, and I'm here on behalf of the Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District. Our mission is to acquire and preserve a regional greenbelt of open space in this area. We also protect natural resources and provide public access. So to that end, we applaud Stanford's commitment to accommodating their development within the academic growth boundary. We also hope that there is a long-term commitment to preservation of the foothills as they are vital to the health of the region. We are also interested in the recreational and transportation trails connections that connect surrounding communities to Stanford, as those will be increasingly used through this robust transportation development management program. We reviewed the recreation and transportation sections of the draft EIR and would hope to see in the final EIR a more robust analysis of potential impacts to those regional trails for both recreation and transportation uses over the course of the general use permit. And that's all. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Any more comments or questions? We have another. By all means. Do you want to come up here or do you want the mic? Okay, any more questions before final comments?
My name is Charmaine. I live in unincorporated Menlo Park, which is part of San Mateo County. And what I've read in the EIR is that Palo Alto and Menlo Park City have been incorporated into the affected jurisdictions, but San Mateo County, unincorporated Menlo Park, has not been considered in the whole plan. So I just want to make sure that San Mateo County, the unincorporated part of Menlo Park, is considered in all of the affected areas that would be impacted by the expansion or
yes, it has. If you look at a couple of sections of the EIR, one is the regulatory setting and the baseline. San Mateo County, its lands are considered, and all the road segments and intersections were considered for the criteria for evaluation. So I'll say that if you find a specific instance where you feel like something in San Mateo County was left out, but there was no systematic attempt at leaving the county out, it was
just that it's mentioned Menlo Park City and not necessarily San Mateo County. So I think it just feels like we're not being included when, because they're calling us city, but we're not really the city. So we want to just make sure that
Okay.
San Mateo County is specifically, because we're a county, we're not.
Yes, there are the unincorporated areas that are a good portion of Stanford lands and are affected by this project. So take a look, and if there's a slight or some omission, be sure to comment. Okay, by all means, you want to come up here? Okay.
This way I can watch everybody's face. And it is good to see a council member here tonight. And I understand that this is being recorded in some way. I mean, that wasn't even mentioned. Is this video or just audio?
Both. Both.
Okay. Get the news out. Get the news out. I am Steve Van Pelt, and I live next to Flood Park in what's called the Flood Triangle, which basically is between Bay and 101 and Willow Road. And I was alluding to the fact there are buses that take the kids off to school, but as far as a transit organization, Samtrans long ago gave up on us, and the Bohannon shuttle was the last thing we had, and now that it's shifted over to Marsh Road, that's a problem. And I often volunteer at Stanford, and that was a very convenient way to get there. Trying to find some place where you can put your car, do this, do that. I mean, when you could walk 2 blocks and get on a shuttle that got you to campus, that was fantastic. And you don't get enough credit. So this has been very useful because now I think we're all starting to understand how much of a piece this is of the total puzzle, because there probably is not a person in this room or city that wouldn't say traffic is our biggest problem, right? But we don't really understand where it came from and where it's going. We just know it's in our way right now, you know. So I didn't fully understand, so that's been very helpful. And I think you guys deserve extra credit, though, because in comparing you to what I've seen from Facebook and what I've seen from the Samtrans Planning Organization, you at least tell us that we as the public can ride the Marguerites. I mean, it's still a mystery how you can afford to do that, but you offer a fantastic service, and it's for free unless I'm going over to Fremont BART. And then it seems like it's even a half-price fare or something. I mean, it's underappreciated. And in fact, when we went through our Connect Menlo process, our consultants, who frankly were more involved with the real estate aspects of things, didn't even talk about any of the transit options into Stanford, which, since you really also serve Menlo Park Caltrain and the surroundings, really are things that all of us can use too. And that's being corrected little by little. In Facebook's recent presentations, it's still a mystery. They're running buses. They're talking about having buses running 2 a minute, lickety-split back and forth between Redwood City Caltrain and their campus, but they don't even mention whether any of the public will be able to ride them or not. That's important, right? You guys deserve extra credit. I don't know how you can do it. So if you can put something in there about how you're able to fund this, right? I think Facebook is funding all of their buses themselves. I don't think they get any thing from the RM2 that I was talking about, the taxes. But something like a Samtrans bus or Dumbarton bus or something like that would conceivably be having a subsidy from the tax plan, which is going to expire, and then we're going to vote on another one, and who knows what's going to happen with that. These are real issues, and the biggest problem I still have, and it goes beyond this, is we have all these little pieces, and we need to know who is controlling the whole and how all this is going to be traded off, because the things that you in your little center sweet spot here are doing are having a significant impact. You don't even have to go very far into the EIR and even the introductory documents to realize how you have reduced the number of commuters that are coming in their own cars. More and more of them are using the buses. Now, it's possible that the buses are in jeopardy because they might be replaced by a train that really is not serving Palo Alto and Stanford. It's really ironic. And I'm hoping that the Menlo Park Council and everybody can start having a conversation for the area as a whole and things. So the other things, I know you even go beyond just what you do for commuters. I know that when I talk to the students and things like that, they have go passes. I mean, it goes far beyond that to where you're even keeping the students off the roads. I mean, even if they don't have a car, they still would probably take the Marguerite to Caltrain and go to Mountain View or something like that if they're going out on a night out. So Stanford deserves a lot of credit. The problem is it's not the whole problem, so it's not the whole solution. So thank you.
Any further comments or questions? Well, thank you all very much. A lot of rich discussion here, and I'll remind everybody that written comments are absolutely the best. I will take your verbal comments. They'll be a part of the record, but if you'd like to also prepare written comments, then please, you can prepare them and send them to David Rader's inbox, and we'll respond to both your verbal and your written comments. So thank you all for coming.